Hi everyone, this is Randy Bishop, and I am just going to be narrating this video for you of the process I went through to create this cover for ImagineFX magazine. This girl and her panda, and you'll see I kind of skipped forward a little bit, jumping into me kind of trying to refine this really rough sketch that I began with, trying to figure out proportions and that sort of thing. Now I'm going back in and trying to make things a little more presentable. The girl, her face gave me a bit of a rough time, so I just kind of skipped, did a really quick sketch on that, and then, went and tried to refine the panda a bit more, which the panda was the fun part for me, as you can probably tell. And like I said, I wasn't happy with the girl's face, so I'm going back in and redrawing it to try to make it a little more appealing and fit the panda a bit better. The nice thing about Photoshop is that I can work on layers, and I can, erase things completely. I can, adjust and transform and tweak things, which is super handy. Like, look at that, man! I can just, erase one face and take another one and stick it on top without any trouble at all. It's super nice. Painting, drawing digitally, working digitally has been a game changer for me. I used to have this prejudice against working digitally because I love paper and pencil. I like the feel of it. But man, Photoshop it's a game changer for me. At the same time, sometimes I think Photoshop has ruined me as an artist, if that makes sense. With Photoshop, I don't have to think ahead too much. I can just, start drawing, go to town. If I make a mistake, I can get rid of it, undo it, or, tweak it with all the different Photoshop tools and stuff. And so sometimes I find myself making mistakes that I never would have made, several years ago, because I don't have to think too much about it. I don't have to think ahead. I don't have to plan, which unfortunately has made me a little bit lazy. But as far as inking goes, inking is one of my favorite parts of the whole process. It's really relaxing and therapeutic. It's a part that I don't have to think too much about. And thinking creatively to me is a lot more taxing than most people give it credit for. The whole process of creating characters or an illustration, planning things out, and creating is pretty taxing on your brain. It's something a lot of people don't think about, but it really takes a toll. And inking to me is a chance for me to not have to think too much about things. I mean, the sketch is already there. I am just using that as a guide to make pretty lines, and it's just nice. It feels good to do. Almost like manual labor to me. I really enjoy manual labor, which might sound weird, but like landscaping or construction or just mowing the lawn, I like it because it frees up my brain to think about other things, but I still feel productive, if that makes sense. Inking is that way to me. I can be thinking about other things. It gives my brain a break, and I can kind of recover some of my mental exhaustion, if that makes sense. As far as questions go, a lot of people ask me about inking, and the thing that I think about the most when I'm inking is trying to put lines down with confidence and pretend I'm putting them down for the first time, if that makes sense. I'm not tracing the sketch underneath. I'm using it as a guide and trying to think about putting the lines down, drawing this image for the first time. Because a lot of times if you trace your sketch, a lot of times you lose the life of it. It just kills it, which is it's heartbreaking when that happens. So the thing that I've found to be most effective for me is to just, in my mind, think, okay, I'm putting this down for the first time. I'm trying to create these appealing shapes for the first time instead of just tracing what's already there, if that makes sense. With the braid, The hair, I'm going to be adding a little bit more detail, and that's to break up some of these bigger shapes. I have a lot of big empty shapes so far, and so I'm trying to add some detail, some visual texture to make it a little bit more interesting. And now that I have the line work done, I've put this line down at the bottom to close any gaps in the inked line work. And then I'm just going to select that and get rid of the excess. And then what I do is I take my magic wand tool, select the outside of the line work, then go up to select, modify expand, and expand the selection by 2 pixels, which pushes it into the line work a little bit so that the selection isn't outside the line, it's buried underneath the line, if that makes sense. Then select the inverse and fill that with whatever color on a new layer, and that gives me my color layer all complete, which is it's a super handy way to get color done. And another super handy tool is the lock transparency tool, which is a little button at the top in the top left corner of the layer menu, which by locking the transparency, what it means is any pixels that are transparent will remain transparent, and any pixels that are opaque will remain opaque. And so you can't paint on anything that's not painted, if that makes sense. You can't paint on any transparent pixels, which is really nice. It makes it so you can select big chunks of your painting and fill them, or you don't have to worry about painting outside the outer lines, if that makes sense, which to me is a super handy thing. As far as color goes, when you're painting a human face, there's this band of warmth that goes across the center of it, across the cheeks and nose and ears, and it's something that adds life to your characters. It just makes them feel a little more real, a little more lifelike. And I tend to exaggerate it a little bit. I punch up the warmth in the face to make it feel more alive, if that makes sense. Something else that's interesting is like the top third of the face, like the forehead, will have more yellows in it. The bottom third of the face will have more greens in it. It's really interesting, and it's not something that I'm really doing in this painting, but if you want your characters to really feel real, if you want the painting to be realistic, punch up the warmths, punch up the reds in the middle of the face, yellows in the top third, and greens in the bottom third. It's a little more pronounced in men because they have facial hair usually. The bottom third of the face, we get 5 o'clock shadow or whatever, and so a lot of times the green will be really pronounced in men, but it's also there in women, and so it's just something to think about, something to keep in mind as you're painting faces. I'm trying to keep the palette here contained. I'm thinking lots of violets and yellows. The girl's hair has a lot of violet. The panda's fur has a lot of violet and a lot of yellow. And I mean, obviously that's because violet and yellow are complementary colors and they look good together. And so I'm trying to keep that in mind. And then later on, I'll make the dress contrast with those complementary colors a little bit. I'll use greens and reds, but more subdued. Like I've kind of tried to keep the reds in the girl's face under control. The lips aren't super red. There's some yellow in there, and the same thing will be true of the dress. I'll have greens and reds, but there'll be more yellows in the reds, to keep things harmonious. After I'm finished with the color layer, I'll duplicate that layer by dragging it down to the new layer icon at the bottom of the layer menu, or you can go to layer duplicate, and I'll fill that with gray so that I have this flat gray that I don't have to worry about thinking about the color anymore. And then I'll add another layer on top of that, duplicate it again, put it on multiply, which is this awesome layer mode that darkens the layers underneath it. I'll fill that layer with white, and then I'll go in with gray and start adding shadows. And the nice thing about filling it with white is I can use the eyedrop tool. If I go in with a darker color, I can go back in with the eyedrop tool, select lighter colors between that gray and the white, if that makes sense. So I get a good variation of values without trying too hard. If that makes sense. It's a nice tool. It's a nice layer mode to take advantage of, and it's how I usually do it when I want to keep my colors and my lights and shadows separate, so that if I send it to a client and they don't like the colors, I can adjust the colors without worrying about messing up the values, if that makes sense. So I'm just going through here and I'm trying to think about surfaces as well. The panda, his fur is going to diffuse light a little bit more than, like, say, the girl's hair or her face. And so I'm trying to keep the textures in there more blurred and soft. And I'll go back later and use a blending brush to soften these up even more. The brush I'm using now is more textured and won't give a great finish to fit with the really clean line work. I love this brush and I use it a lot, but with the crisp, clean lines, it doesn't quite fit. And so I'll go back in with a softer brush later to soften up some of the edges, clean things up a little bit. Something that I've noticed as my career has progressed is I've come to really enjoy painting fabric. I used to have a really hard time with costuming, with fabric in general, because I used to draw like buff naked dudes almost exclusively, because I learned how to draw anatomy from comics, and they don't wear real clothes, right? They wear spandex, so to show off their muscles, right? And so I had a really hard time with costuming and stuff for a long time, but I've come to really enjoy it, and part of the reason for that is that I recognize that I had a deficiency in my abilities, right? I had a hard time with clothing, and it's a necessary skill to have, and so I found an artist that I love, J.C. Leindecker. He's a master at folds and fabric and all that, and so I made a study of his work. I bought, like, my all-time favorite art book is just called J.C. Leindecker, and it's almost entirely cover to cover artwork, and it's gorgeous. And I spent a long time studying his work and trying to duplicate his method of painting fabric, and learned a lot that way. And to me, that's part of developing a personal style. A lot of people ask me about style, like how do you draw that way? Like how do you develop a personal style? And to me, style is basically just a compilation of influences, right? I have dozens and dozens of artists that I love and admire, and I find myself taking little things from each artist, things that I admire, things that I like, and applying them to my own work. And to me, that's where my personal style has come from, and that's how it's continually evolving, is from influences from other artists. Now I'm working on a screen layer. Multiply darkens all the layers beneath it, right? Anything that's darker than white shows up on that layer and darkens the layers beneath it. Screen is just the opposite. Anything lighter than black lightens the layers underneath. And you can see if you look at the layer I'm working on, it looks entirely black because it's filled with black, and I'm just selecting slightly lighter tones and using those to create highlights. Um, and again, it's just so that I can edit color and value separately. I can tweak the colors of the shadows and the highlights um, without worrying too much about messing with the colors beneath. I'm working with gray because gray isn't ideal for highlights and shadows, but I can go back and use Colorize, which is, you can hit, like if you're using a Mac, do Command U to use your hue, saturation, brightness menu, and there's a little button that says Colorize. You click that, and it will take your layer that's made of gray, right, and it'll make it any color that you want. You can adjust the saturation and all of that from there. And so I work with gray to begin with, and then I go back and adjust the color of the shadows and highlights later on. Here I'm thinking about materials, surfaces. The silk of the girl's dress, I want it to be silk, and I'm trying to keep in mind the way that silk reacts to light. And so I'm going to put much stronger highlights and crisper shadows in the silk to contrast with the fur of the panda and the other surfaces in the illustration. And again, this is something that I really enjoy. I enjoy painting folds and creases and that sort of thing because it's something that I used to struggle with, and it's something that I really enjoy now after I've come to grow more comfortable with it. I want to go back again and talk really quickly about style. I've been thinking about it, and the thing that I think is really interesting and awesome to me about the animation industry is that style, everybody, okay, like when I was talking about style, I was talking about, getting inspiration from other artists. And that's something that I'm constantly doing, and my style is constantly evolving as a result. And the thing that's really cool about the animation industry is that it's not competitive in the sense that artists are trying to get ahead of each other or, push each other out or anything like that. It's a competitive industry. It's difficult to get yourself out there and become known and, get work, but it's not competitive as far as the other artists go. It's more of a community, which is part of what I love about working as a character designer. I'll go to different expos and conventions and festivals and whatever, and it's a community. It's not like the other artists. Everybody loves each other's work. Everybody is supportive and recognizes the good in everybody else, and it's more of a community, and it's something that's inspiring to me, and it's something that I was really surprised to find that, and really grateful at the same time, because there are a lot of artists out there that intimidate me. A lot of people who are just so enormously talented and good at what they do that it's a relief to me to meet them and find that they're generous and they're nice, and they don't resent you for trying to muscle your way into the industry. They, more often than not, they'll be willing to help and support you in your artwork, which is really awesome. Okay, here what I'm doing is I'm designing the textile pattern that'll go on the girl's dress, and I'm trying to more or less replicate the style of textile pattern that I've seen in traditional textiles, like Chinese patterns, and they have like these curling clouds or smoke or flames or dragons or whatever that repeat throughout the fabric. But I'm trying to make it my own, keep it in the same style of what I've got going so far, so it's specifically stylized to fit the illustration. And this is another thing that I have struggled with in the past, and that I really enjoy doing now, is designing patterns and logos and that sort of thing. It's different than what I usually do, but it's a lot of fun, and it's kind of a break from the way that I usually think about things. Sometimes it's fun for me to change either the medium I'm working in or the kind of project that I'm working on. Sometimes, like if I'm having a hard time with a character design, sometimes I'll get out a chunk of clay and sculpt the character instead of drawing it, which is it's beneficial. It helps my mind to think about things a little bit differently. And it's a similar thing here, where I'm not thinking about the character, I'm thinking about this pattern. And this was a lot of fun to do, because it's always fun for me to create a pattern that you can repeat and have it go smoothly, if that makes sense. Like this just, it worked out perfectly, where I was able to take this pattern and repeat it over and over and over again, create something that I was satisfied with and I felt went just perfectly with the girl's dress. Okay, now this part was kind of tricky. Creating, well, not this part specifically. Like I said, this pattern just worked out perfectly, where I was able to manipulate it and create it so that it repeated. The tricky part was shaping the pattern to the form of the fabric on the dress. On this sleeve, there's not a lot of deformation in the fabric, so it was pretty easy to use the warp tool to adjust it to fit that. On the other sleeve, though, there are a lot of creases and folds in the fabric, and so in that instance, I have to go in and select individual sections of the fabric that I think there are breaks in the fabric, where it folds over on top of itself, and so selecting those individual parts and deforming those with the warp tool individually helps to create this idea that the pattern is shaping itself to the form. It's just enough that it suggests that it wraps around there rather than being flat. It's not perfect, but it's enough to where nobody's going to notice unless they're being super particular. The rest of this was pretty straightforward. The dress is pretty, it falls pretty straight for the most part. I just had to make a couple little tweaks to make it feel like it's curving with the fabric, but nothing too hard. The most painfully time-consuming part of this whole thing was painting in this pattern on the dress. It just took forever. So I won't make you sit through all of it. I just wanted you to know that it took me forever. I wanted you to appreciate that. Okay, now that things are pretty much done, I'm going to go back and adjust, like I said, colorize the highlights and the shadows to, make them feel a little more impressionistic, a little more lifelike. And that is pretty much it. I went through this afterward and, put it in the background, made some adjustments to the colors and that sort of thing as per feedback from the client. So, but that's pretty much the whole process. Hopefully you found it instructional and somewhat beneficial. Thanks for watching.